hands in ice cold water, felt considerably refreshed. Before going out to breakfast, while looking around the room for a few things which I wanted to take with me, I espied upon the table a long Tie down store, come and explore. 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 Come and explore. Tie store. Answer. The narrative I speak of is in manuscript. I will produce it in the near future, and my design is to read it aloud to you, or to allow you to read it to me, as you may select. Farther, my wish is that during the reading you shall interpose any objection or question that you deem proper. This reading will occupy many evenings, and I shall of necessity be with you often. When the reading is concluded, we will seal the package securely, and I shall leave you forever. You will then deposit the manuscript in some safe place, and I will let it remain for 30 years. When this period has elapsed, I wish you to publish this history to the world. Your conditions seem easy, I said after a few seconds' pause. They are certainly very simple. Do you accept? I hesitated, for the prospect of giving myself up to a succession of interviews with this extraordinary and mysterious personage seemed to require consideration. He evidently divined my thoughts, for, rising from his chair, he abruptly, "Let me have your answer now." I debated the matter no farther, but he answered, "I accept conditionally." "Name your condition," the guest replied. "I will either publish the work or induce some other man to do so." "Good," he said. "I will see you again." With a polite bow, turning to the door which I had previously locked, he opened it softly, and with a quiet "good night," disappeared into the hallway. I looked after him with the bewildered senses, but a sudden impulse caused me to glance towards the table, when I saw that he had forgotten his knife. With the view of returning this, I reached to pick it up, but my fingertips no sooner touched the handle than a sudden chill shivered across my nerves, not as an electric shock, but rather as a sensation of extreme cold was the current that ran through me in an instant. Rushing into the hallway to the landing of the stairs, I called after the mysterious... Glad I checked it. I called after the mysterious being. "You have forgotten your knife." But beyond the faint echo of my voice, I heard no sound. The phantom was gone. A moment later, I was at the foot of the stairs and had thrown open the door. A street lamp shed an uncertain light in front of the house. I shut out and listened intently for a moment, but not a sound was audible. If indeed I accept the beating of my own heart, which throbbed so wildly that I fancied I heard it, no football echoed from the deserted streets. All was silent as a way back to my room, and sank collapsed into an easy chair. I was more than exhausted. I quivered from head to foot, not with cold, but with strange nervous chills that found incessant expressions in my spinal column and seemed to flash up and down, back vibrating like a feverish pulse. Kundalini. This active pain was succeeded by a feeling of frozen numbness, and I sat, I know not how long, trying to tranquilize myself, and I think temporarily of the night's occurrence. By degrees, I recovered my normal sensations and directed my will in the channel of sober reasoning. I said to myself, there can be no mistake about his visit, for his knife is here as a witness to the fact. So much is sure, and I will secure that testimony at all events. I discovered that the knife had disappeared. With this reflection, I turned to the table, but to my astonishment, I discovered that the knife had disappeared. Just time. It needed but this miracle to start the perspiration in great cold beads from every pore. My brain was in a war, and reeling into a chair, I covered my face with my hands. How long I sat in this posture, I do not remember. I only know that I began to doubt my own sanity and wonder if this was not the way people became deranged. Had not my peculiar habits of isolation, irregular and intense study, erratic living, all conspired to unseat reason? Surely here was every ground to believe so, and yet I was able to still think consistently and hold steady to a single line of thought. Insane people cannot do that, I reflected, and gradually the tremor and excitement wore away. When I had become calmer and more collected, and my sober judgment said, go to bed, sleep was just as long as you can hold your eyelids down, and when you awake refreshed, as you will, think out the whole subject at your leisure. I arose, threw open the shutters, and found that the day was breaking. Hastily undressing, I went to bed and closed my eyes, vaguely conscious of some smoothing guardianship. Perhaps I was physically exhausted. I soon lost myself in the oblivion of sleep. I did not dream. At least I could not afterwards remember my dream as if I had one, but I had recollected thinking that somebody struck 10 distinct blows on my door, which seemed to me to be the metal of very sonorous. These 10 blows in my semi-conscious state I counted. I lay very quiet for a time, collecting my thoughts and noting various objects about the room until my eye caught the dial of a French clock upon the mantel. It was a few minutes past 10, and the blows I have heard were the strokes of a hammer upon the gong of the clock. The sun shining into the room, which was quite cold, for the fire had gone out. I arose, dressed myself quickly, and after thoroughly laving my face and hands in ice cold water, felt considerably refreshed. Before going out to breakfast, while looking around the room for a few things which I wanted to take with me, I espied upon the table a long white hair. This was indeed a surprise, for I had about concluded that my adventure of the previous night was a species of waking nightmare, the result of overworked brain and weakened body, but here was tangible evidence to the contrary, an assurance that my mysterious visitor was not a fancy or a dream. In his parting words, "I will see you again," recurred to me with singular effect. He will see me again. Very well. I will preserve this evidence of his visit for future use. I wound the delicate filament into a coil, folded it carefully in a bit of paper, and consigned it to a corner in my pocketbook, though not without some misgiving that it too might disappear, as did the knife. The stranger the strange experience of that night had a good effect on me. I became more regular in my habits, took abundant sleep and exercise, and was more methodical in my modes of study and reasoning. And in short time found myself vastly improved in every way, mentally and physically. Reminds me of a psilocybin mushroom trip in my experiences. Said Ty, just Ty, just Ty, just Ty. Just think about that. The days went fleeting into weeks, and weeks into months, and while the form and figure of the white-haired stranger were seldom absent from my mind, he came no more. And we return for chapter 2. Oh, wait. Who's ready for chapter 2? All right. Just Ty, just Ty, just Ty. Let's dive into chapter 2. A friendly conference. It is rare in our present civilization to find a man who lives alone. This remark does not apply to hermits or persons of abnormal or perverted mental tendencies, but to the majority of mankind living and moving actively among their fellows and engaged in the ordinary occupations of humanity. Every man must have at least one confidant, either of his own household or within the circle of his intimate friends. There may possibly be rare exceptions among persons of genius in starcraft, war, or commerce, but it is doubtful even in such instances if any keep all their thoughts to themselves, hermetically sealed from their fellows. As a prevailing rule, either a loving wife or a very near friend shares the inner thought of the most secretive individual, even when secrecy seems an indispensable element to success. The tendency to a free interchange of ideas and experiences is almost universal. Instinct prompting the natural man to unburden his most sacred thoughts when the proper confidant and the proper time come from for the disclosure. For months, I kept to myself the events narrated in the preceding chapters. It's like holding in a psychedelic trip, or something. And this for several reasons. First, the dread of ridicule that will follow the relation of the fantastic occurrences, and the possible suspicion of my sanity that might result from the recital. Second, very grave doubts as to the reality of my experiences. Excuse me. But by degree, self-confidence was restored as I reasoned the matter over and reassured myself by occasional contemplation of the silvery hair I had coiled in my pocketbook, and which at first I had expected would vanish as did the stranger's knife. There came upon me a feeling that I should see my weird visitor again at an early day. I resisted the impression, for it was a feeling of the idea rather than a thought, but the vague expectation grew upon me in spite of myself, until at length it became a conviction which no argument or logic could shake. Curiously enough, as the original incident receded into the past, this new idea thrust itself into the foreground, and I began in my own mind to court another interview. At times, sitting alone at night, I felt that I was watched by unseen eyes. These eyes hunted me in my solitude, and I was morally sure of the presence of another than myself in the room. The sensation was at first unpleasant, and I tried to throw it off. with partial success, but only for a while could I banish the intrusive idea. And as the thought took form and the invisible presence became more actual to conscious, I hope that the stranger will make good his parting promise. I will see you again. On one thing I was resolved. I would at least be better informed on the subject of hallucinations and apparitions and not be taken unawares as I had been. And to this end, I decided to confer with my friend, Professor Tickerins, a quiet, thoughtful man of varied accomplishments and thoroughly read upon a great number of topics, especially in the literature of the marvelous. So I was comfortable with that trip. Now I'm ready for another trip. So to the professor I went. After due appointment and confided to him full particulars of my adventures, he listened patiently and thought throughout, and when I had finished assured me in a matter-of-fact way that such hallucinations were by no means rare. His remark was provoking, for I did not expect from the patient interest he had shown while I was telling my story that the whole matter would be dismissed thus similarity. I said with some warmth, "But this was not a hallucination. I tried at first to persuade myself that it was illusory, but the more I have thought the experience over, the more real it becomes to me." "Perhaps you were dreaming," said the professor. "No," I said, "I have not that hypothesis, and it will not do. Many things make that view untenable." Do not be too sure of that," he said. "You were, by your own account, in a highly nervous condition and physically tired. It's possible, perhaps probable, that in this state, as you sat in your chair, you dozed off for a short interval, during which the illusion flashed through your mind." "How do you explain the fact that incidents occupying a large portion of a night occurred in an interval which you described as a flash?" "Easily enough. In dreams, time may not exist. Periods embracing weeks or months may be reduced to an instant. Long journeys or hours of conversation or a multitude of transactions may be compressed into a term measured by the opening or closing of a door, or the striking of a clock. In dreams, ordinary standards of reason find no place, while ideas or events chase them through the mind more rapidly than thought." Conceding all this, why did I, conceding the unusual character of the incidents, accept them as real, as substantial, as natural as the most commonplace events? "There is nothing extraordinary in that," he replied. "In dreams, all sorts of absurdities, impossibilities, disconcertities, and violations of natural law appear realities, without exciting the least surprise or suspicion. Imagination runs riot and is supreme, and the reason for the time is dormant. We see ghost spirits, the form of persons dead or living. We suffer pain, pleasure, hunger, and all sensations and emotions, without a moment question of the reality. Do any of the subjects of our dreams or visions leave tangible evidence of their presence?" "Assuredly not," he answered with an incredulous, half-impatient gesture. "The idea is absurd." "Then I was not dreaming," I mused. Without looking at me, the professor went on. "These false presentiments may have their origin in other ways, as from mental disorders caused by indigestion. Nikolai, a noted bookseller of Berlin, was thus afflicted. His experiences are interesting and possibly subjective. Let me read some to you." The professor hereupon glanced over his bookshelf, selected a volume, and proceeded to read. All these phantoms appear to me in their natural size and as distinct as if alive, exhibiting different shades of carnation in the uncovered parts, as well as different colors and fashions in their dresses. Though the colors seem somewhat paler than in real nature, none of the figures appear particularly comical or disgusting, most of them being of indifferent shape, and some presenting a pleasant aspect. The longer these phantoms continued to visit me, the more frequently did they return, while at the same time they increased in number about 4 weeks after they had first appeared. I also began to hear them talk. These phantoms conversed among themselves, but more frequently addressed their discourse to me. Their speeches were uncommonly short, and never of an unpleasant turn. At different times there appeared to me both dear and sensible friends of both sexes, whose addresses tended to appease my grief, which had not wholly subsided. Their consolatory speeches were in general addressed to me when I was alone. Sometimes, however, I was accosted by these consoling friends while I was engaged in company, and not unfrequently while real persons were speaking to me. These consolatory address consisted sometimes of abrupt phrases, and at other times they were regularly executed. Oh no. Here I interrupted. I note, Professor, that Mr. Nikolai knew these forms to be illusions. Without answering my remark, he read, there is in imagination a potency far exceeding the fabled power of Aladdin's lamp. How often does one sit in wintry evening musings and trance in the glowing embers, the features of an absent friend? Imagination with his magic wand will there build a city with his countless spirals, or marshal contending armies, or drive the content shattering ships upon the oceans? The following story related by Scott affords a good illustration of this principle. Not long ago, after the death of an illustrious poet who had filled, while living, a great station in the eyes of the public, a literary friend to whom the deceased had been well known, while engaged during the darkening twilight of an autumn evening in pursuing of the publication which professed to detail the habits and opinions of the distinguished individuals who was now no more. As the reader had enjoyed the intimacy of the decades deceased to a considerable degree, he was deeply interested in the publication, which contained some particular relating to himself and other friends. A visitor was sitting in an apartment who was also engaged in reading. Their sitting room opened into an entrance hall, rather fantastically fitted with the articles of armor, skins of wild animals, and the like. It was when laying down his book and passing into this hall, through which the moon was beginning to shine, that the individual of whom I speak saw right before him, in a standing posture, the exact representation of his departed friend, whose recollection had been so strongly brought to his imagination. He stopped for a single moment, so as to notice the wonderful accuracy with which fancy had impressed upon the bodily eye with the particularities of dress and position of the illustrious poet. Sensible, however, of the delusion, he felt no sentiment save that wonder at the extraordinary accuracy of the resemblance, and stepped onward to the figure, which resolved itself as he approached into the various materials of which he was composed. These were merely a screen occupied by greatcoats, shawls, plaids, and other articles as are usually found in the country entrance hall. The spectacular returned to the spot from which he had seen the illusion, and endeavored with all his power to recall the image would have been so singularly vivid, but this he was unable to do. And the person who had witnessed the apparition, or more properly, whose excited state had been the mean of rising it, had only to return to the apartment and tell his young friend under what a striking hallucination he had for a moment labored. End quotes. Hence, I constrained to call the professor to a halt. Your stories are all very interesting, I said, but I fail to perceive any analogy in either the conditions or the incidents to my experience. I was fully awake and conscious at the time, and the man I saw appeared and moved about in full glare in the gaslight. Perhaps not, he answered. I am simply giving you some general illustrations of the subject, but here is a case more to the point. He again read. A lady once passing through a wood in the darkening twilight of a stormy evening to visit a friend who was watching over a dying child. The clouds were thick, the raining began to fall, darkness was increasing, the wind was moaning mournfully through the trees. The lady's heart almost failed her as she saw that she had a mile to walk through the woods in the gathering gloom, but the reflection of the situation of her friend forbade her from turning back. Excited and trembling, she called to her aid a nervous resolution and pressed onward. She had not pursued it far when she beheld in the path before her the moment of some very indistinct object. It appeared to keep a little distinct ahead of her, and as I made effort to get nearer to see what it was, it seemed proportionally to recede. The lady began to feel rather unpleasantly. There was some pale white object certainly discernible before her, and it appeared mysteriously to float along at a regular distance without my effort at motion. Notwithstanding the lady's good sense and unusual resolution, a cold chill began to come over her. She made every effort to resist her fears, and soon succeeded in drawing nearer the mysterious object, when she was appalled at beholding the features of her friend's child in cold death, wrapped in its shroud. Oh, sorry, guys. She gazed earnestly, and there it remained distinct and clear before her eyes. She considered it a premonition that her friend's child was dead, and that she must hasten to her aid. But there was the apparition directly in her path, and she must pass it. Taking up a little stick, she forced herself to the object, and behold, some little animal scampered away. It was this that her excited imagination had transformed into a corpse of an infant in its winding sheet. I was a little irritated and once more interrupted the reader warmly. This is exasperating. Now, what resemblance is there between the vagaries of a hysterical, weak-minded woman and my case? He smiled and read again. The numerous stories of told ghosts or the spirits He smiled and read again. The numerous stories told of ghosts or the spirits of persons who are dead will in most instances be found to have originated in deceased imaginations aggregated by some abnormal defect of the mind. We may mention a remarkable case in point, and one which is not mentioned in English works on this subject. It is told by a compiler of Les Causes Célebres. Two young noblemen, the Marquis de Rambouillet and de Poissy, belonging to two of the first families of France, made an agreement in the warmth of their friendship that when one who died first should return to the other with tidings of the world to come. Soon afterwards, de Rambouillet went to the wars in Flanders, while de Poissy remained in Paris, stricken by a fever. Lying alone in bed and severely ill, de Poissy one day heard a rustling of his bed curtains, and turning round saw his friend de Rambouillet in full military attire. The sick man sprung over the bed to welcome his friend, but the other receded and said that he had come to fulfill his promise, having been killed on that very day. He further said that it behooved de Percy to think more of the afterworld, as all that was said of it was true, and as he himself would die in his first battle. De Percy was then left by the phantom, and it was afterwards found that de Rambouillet had fallen on that day. Just. Ah, I said, and so the phantom predicted an event that followed an incident. Spiritual illusions, explained the professor, are not unusual, and well-authenticated cases are not wanting in which they have been induced in persons of intelligence by functional or organic disorders. In the last case cited, the prediction was followed by a fulfillment, but this was chance or mere coincidence. It would be strange indeed if in the multitude of dreams that will come to humanity, some few should not be followed by events so similar as to warrant the belief that they were prefigured. But here is an illustration that fits your case. Let me read. In some instances, it may be difficult to decide whether spectral appearances and spatial noises proceed from physical derangement or from an overwrought state of mind. Want of exercise and amusement may also be a prevailing cause. A friend mentions to us the following case. An acquaintance of his, a merchant in London, who had for years paid very close attention to business, one day while alone in his counting house, very much surprised to hear, as he imagined, persons outside the door talking freely about him. Thinking it was some acquaintances who were playing off a trick, he opened the door to request them to come in, when to his amusement he found that there was nobody there. He again sat down to his desk, and in a few minutes the same dialogue recommenced. The language was very alarming. One voice seemed to say, "We have the scoundrel in his own counting house. Let us go in and seize him." "Certainly," replied the other voice. "It is right to take him. He has been guilty of a great crime and ought to be brought to condemned punishment." Alarmed at these threats, the bewildered merchants rushed to the door, and there again no person was there to be seen, and now locked his door and went home. But the voices, as he thought, followed him through the crowd, and he arrived at his house in a most uninventable state of mind, inclined to ascribe the voices to derangement in the mind. He sent for a medical attendant and told his case, and a certain kind of treatment was prescribed. This, however, failed. The voices menacing him with punishment for purely imaginary crimes continued, and he reduced to the brink of despair. At length, a friend prescribed him entire relaxation from business and a daily game of cricket, which, to his great relief, proved an effectual remedy. The exercise banished the phantom voices, and they were no more heard. So, you think that I'm in need of outdoor exercise? Exactly. And that my experiences was hallucinatory and the result of vertigo or some temporary calentor of the brain, vertigo, to be playing with you? Yes. But I asked you a while ago, would specters or phantoms ever leave tangible evidence of their presence? The professor's eyes dilated in interrogation. I continued. Well, this one did. After I had followed him out, I found on the table a long white hair, which I still have. And producing a little coil from my pocketbook, I handed it to him. He examined it curiously, eyed it ferociously, and handed it back with the cautious remark, I think you better had commence your exercise at once. All right. Now, let's begin with chapter 3. Thanks for just tying, folks. Just think about these things. Awesome. Very interesting, very esoteric book. Let's go. A second interview with the mysterious visitor. It is not pleasant to have one's mental responsibility brought in question, and the result of my interview with Professor Chickering was, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory. Not that he had exactly questioned my sanity, but it was all too evident that he was disposed to accept my statement of a plain matter-of-fact occurrence with a too liberal modicum of salt. I say matter-of-fact occurrence, in full knowledge of the truth that I myself had at first regarded the whole transaction as a fantasia or flight of mind, the result of extreme nervous tension. But in the interval succeeding, I had abundant opportunity to correlate my thoughts and to bring some sort of order out of the mental and physical chaos of that strange, eventful night. True, the preliminary events leading up to it were extraordinary. The dismal weather, the depression of body and spirit under which I labored, the wild whirl of thought keeping pace with the elements, in short, a general contentation of events that seemed to be ordered especially for the introduction of some abnormal visitor. The night would seem indeed have been incomplete without a ghost. But was it a ghost? There was nothing ghostly about my visitor, except the manner of his entrance and exit. In other respects, he seemed substantial enough. He was, in his manners, courteous and polished as a Chesterfield, learned as a savant in his conversation, human in his thoughtful regard of my fears and misgivings. But that tremendous forehead, with its crown of silver hair, the long translucent beard of pearly whiteness, and above all, the astounding facility with which he read my hidden thoughts, these were not natural. The professor had been patient with me. I had a right to expect this. He was entertaining to the extent of reading such excerpts as he had with him on the subject of hallucinations and their supposed causes, but had not spoiled all by assigning me at last to a place with the questionable, unbalanced character he had cited. I thought so, and the reflection provoked me, and this thought grew upon me until I came to regard his stories and attended theories as so much literary trash. Trash. My own reflections had been sober and deliberate and had led me to seek a rational explanation of the unusual phenomena. I had gone to Professor Chickering's for a certain measure of sympathy, and what was more to the point, to secure his suggestions and assistance in the further unraveling of a profound mystery that might contain a secret of untold use to humanity. Repulsed by the mode in which my confidence had been received, I decided to do what I should have done from the outset, to keep my own counsel and to follow alone the investigation to the end, no matter what the result might be. I could not forget or ignore the silver hair I had so rigorously preserved. That was genuine. It was tangible, as real, as convincing a witness as would have been the entire head of my singular visitant, whatever might be his nature. I began to feel at ease the moment my course was decided, and the feeling was at once renewed within me that the gray head would come again, and by degree that expectation ripened into a desire, only intensified as the days sped by, the weeks passed into months, summer came and went, autumn fast and fading, but the mysterious unknown did not appear. A curious fancy led me now to regard him as my friend, for the mixed and indefinite feelings I felt at first towards him had almost unaccountably had changed to those of sincere regard. He was not always in my thoughts, for I had abundant occupation at all times to keep both brain and hands busy, but there were few evenings in which I did not. Just before retiring, give myself up for a brief period of quiet commune with my own thoughts. I must confess, at such times the unknown occupied the larger share of my attention. Constant contemplation of any theme begets a feeling of familiarity or acquaintance with the same, and if that subject be an individual, as in the present instance, such contemplation lessens the liability to surprise from any unsuspected development. In fact, I was not only anticipated a visit, but courted it. The old Latin maxim that had played with never less alone than when alone had domiciled itself within my brain as a permanent lodger, a conviction, a feeling rather than a thought defined, and I had but little difficulty in associating an easy chair with which I had to come to place in a certain position for my expected visitor with his presence. Indian summer had passed, and the fall was nearly gone when, for some inexplicable reason, the number 7 began to haunt me. What I had to do with the number 7, or 7 with me? When I sat down at night with persistent numbers mixed itself in my thoughts to my intense annoyance. Bother take the mystic numeral. What was I to do with 7? I found myself asking this question audibly one evening, when it suddenly occurred to me that I will refer to the date of my friend's visit. I kept no journal, but reference to a record of some business transaction that I had associated with that event showed me that it took place on November 7th. That settled the impromptu 7. I should look for whoever he was on the first anniversary of his visit, which was the 7th, now close at hand. The instant I had reached this conclusion, the number left me, and troubled me no more. Just November 3rd had passed, the 4th and the 5th had come, when a stubborn, protesting notion entered my mind that I was yielding to a superstitious idea and that it was time to control my vacillating will. Accordingly, on this day, I sent word to a friend that, if agreeable to him, I will call him on the evening of the 7th for a short social chat. But as I expected to be engaged until later than usual, would he excuse me if I did not reach his apartment until 10? The request was singular, but as I was now accustomed somewhat odd, it excited no comment, and the answer was returned, requesting me to come. The 7th of November came at last. I was nervous during the day, which seemed to drag tediously, and several times it was remarked to me that I seemed abstracted and ill at ease, but I held my peace. Night came cold and clear, and the stars shone brighter than usual, I thought. It was a sharp contrast to the night a year ago. I took an early supper, for which I had no appetite, after which I strode aimlessly about the streets, reveling how I should put in the time till 10 o'clock, when I was to call upon my friend. I decided to go to the theater, and to the theater I went. The play was spectacular, Aladdin, or The Wonderful Lamp. The entertainment to me was a flat failure, for I was busy with my thoughts, and it was not long until my thoughts were busy with me, and I found myself attempting to answer a series of questions that finally became embarrassing. Why did you make an appointment for 10 o'clock instead of 8 if you wish to keep away from your apartment? I haven't thought of that before. It was stupid to a degree, if not ill-mannered, and I frankly admit it as such. Why did you make an appointment at all in the face of the fact that you not only expected a visitor, but were anxious to meet him? This was easily answered, because I did not wish to yield to what struck me as superstition. But do you expect to extend your call until morning? Well, no, I haven't thought or arranged to do so. Well, then, what is to prevent your expected guest from awaiting your return? Well, wait, let's go back a bit. Well, no, I hadn't arranged to do so. Well, then what is it to prevent your expected guest from awaiting your return? Or what assurance have you that he will not encounter you in the streets under circumstances that will provoke or at least embarrass you? None whatever. Then what have you gained by your stupid perversity? Nothing. Beyond the assertion of my own individuality. Why not go home and receive your guest and become in style? No, I would not do that. I had started on this course, and I would persevere in it. I would be consistent, and I so proceeded at least until 9 o'clock. And when I quit the theater in sullen dejection and went home to make some slight preparation for my evening call. With my latchkey, I let myself into the front door of the apartment house wherein I lodged, walked through the hall, up the staircase, and paused at the threshold of my room, wondering what I would find. Opening the door, I entered, leaving it open behind me so that the light from the hallway would shine into the room, which was dark, and there was no tantrum above the door. The great fire had cracked, and a solid mass of charred bituminous coal which shed no illumination beyond a faded red glow at the bottom, showing that it was barely alive, and no more. I struck a match on the underside of the mantel shelf, and as I lit the gas, I heard the click of the latch door. I turned instantly. The door had been gently closed by some unknown force, if not by unseen hands, for there was no breath of air stirring. The preternatural interference was not pleasant, for I had hoped in the event of another visit from my friend, if friend he was, that he would bring no uncanny or ghostly manifestation to disturb me. I looked at the clock. The index pointed to 9:30. I glanced about the room. It was orderly, everything in its proper position, even to the armchair that I had been brought to place for my nondescript visitor. It was time to be going, so I turned to the dressing case, brushed my hair, put on a clean scarf, and moved towards the washstand, which stood in the little alcove of the opposite of the room. My self-commanded well nigh deserted me as I did so, for there in the armchair that a moment before was empty sat my guest of a year ago, facing me with placid features. The room began to revolve. A faint sick feeling came over me, and I reveled into the first convenient chair and covered my face with my hands. This depression lasted but an instant. However, as I recovered self-possession, I felt, or fancied I felt, a pair of penetrating eyes fixed upon me with the same searching gaze that I remembered so well. I ventured to look up. Sure enough, there he was, the beaming eyes, and there he was. Rising from his chair, he towered up to his full height, smiled pleasantly, and with his slight inclination of the head, murmured, "Permit me to wish you good evening. I am profoundly glad to meet you again." It was a full minute before I could muster courage to answer. "I wish I could say as much for myself." "And why shouldn't you?" he said gently and courteously. "You have realized for the past 6 months that I would return. More than that, you have known for some time the very day and almost the exact hour of my coming, have even wished for it, and in the face of all this, I found you preparing to evade the requirements of common hospitality. Are you doing either me or yourself justice?" I was nettled at the knowledge he displayed of my movements and of my very thoughts. My old stubbornness asserted itself, and I was rude enough to say, "Perhaps it is as you say. At all events, I am obligated to keep an arrangement, and with your permission will now retire." It was curious to mark the effect of this speech upon the intruder. He immediately became grave, reached quietly into his inner pocket coat, drew hence the same glittering, horrible, mysterious knife that had so terrified and bewildered me a year before, and looking me steadily in the eye, said coldly, yet with a certain tone of sadness, "Well, I will not grant permission. It is unpleasant to resort to this style of argument, but I do to it to save time and controversy." I stepped back in terror and reached for the old-fashioned bell cord with the heavy tassel at the end that depended from the ceiling and was on point of grasping and giving it a vigorous pull. "Not so fast, if you please," he said sternly as he stepped forward and gave the knife a rapid swish through the air above my head, causing the cord to fall in a tangle about my hand, cut cleanly high above my reach. I gazed in dumb stupor at the rope about my hand and raised my eyes to the remnant above. That was motionless. There was not the slightest perceivable vibration, such as would naturally be expected. I turned to look at my guest. He had resumed his seat and had also regained his pleasant expression. But he still held the knife in his hand, with his arm extended at rest upon a table which stood upon his right. Let us have an end to this folly," he said. "Think a moment, and you will see that you are in fault. Your error will rectify easily, and then to business. I will first show you the futility of trying to escape this interview, and then we will proceed to work. For time presses, there is much to do." Having delivered his remark, he detached a single silvery hair from his head, blew it from his fingers, and let it and, and let it float gently upon the upturned edge of the knife. which was still resting on the table. The hair was divided as readily as had been the bell cord. I was transfixed with astonishment, for he had evidently aimed to exhibit the quality of the blade, though he made no allusion to the feat, but smilingly went on with his discourse. It was just a year ago tonight when we first met. Upon that occasion you made an agreement with me which you were in honor bound to keep, and here he paused as if to take note the effect of his word upon me, then added significantly, will keep. I have been at some, let me scroll down, pains to impress upon your mind the fact that I will be here tonight. You responded and knew that I was coming, and yet, in obedience to a silly whim, this deliberately made a meaningless engagement with no purpose than to violate a solemn obligation. I now insist that you keep your prior engagement with me, but I do not wish that you should be rude to your friend, so you had better write him a polite note excusing yourself and dispatch it at once. I saw that he was right, and there was no shadow of justification for my conduct, or at least I was subdued by his presence. So I wrote the note without delay, and was casting about for some way to send it, when he said, fold it, seal it, address it, and you seem to forget what is proper. I did as he directed mechanically, and without thinking what I was doing, handed it to him. He took it naturally, glanced at the superscription, went to the door, which he opened slightly, and handed the billet as if to some messenger who seemed to be in waiting outside, then closed and locked the door, turning towards me with the apparent object of seeing if I was looking. He deftly drew his knife twice across the front of the doorknob, making a deep cross, then deposited the knife in his pocket and resumed his seat. Just tie, guys, just tie, just tie. As soon as he was comfortably seated, he again began the conversation. Now that we have the settlement Now that we have settled the preliminaries, I will ask if you remember what I required of you a year ago. I thought that I did. Please repeat it. I wish to make sure that you do, then we will start fair. In the first place, you are to present me with a manuscript. Hardly correct, he interrupted. I was to acquaint you with a narrative, which is already in manuscript. Acquaint you with it, read it to you, if you prefer not to read it to me. I beg your pardon, I answered. That is correct. You were to read the manuscript to me, and during the reading I was to interpose such comments, remarks, or objections as seemed proper, to embody as interludes in the manuscripts as my own interpolations, however, and not as part of the original. Very good, he replied. You have the idea exactly. Proceed. I agreed. I agreed that when the reading had been completed, I will seal the complete manuscript securely, deposit in some safe place, there to remain for 30 years, where it must be published. Just so, he answered. We understand each other as we should. Before we proceed further, how can you think of any point of which you need enlightenment? If so, ask such questions as you choose, and I will answer them. I thought for a moment, but no query occurred to me. After a pause, he said, well, if you think of nothing new, perhaps hereafter questions will occur to you which you can ask. But as it is late and you are tired, we will not commence now. I will see you just 1 week from tonight when we will begin. From that time on, we will follow the subject as rapidly as you choose, but see to it that you make no engagements that will interfere with our work. We understand each other. We press further. From those that time on, we will follow the subject as rapidly as you choose, but see to it that you make no engagement that will interfere with our work. For I shall be more exacting in the future. I promise. And he rose to go. A sudden impulse seized me, and I said, "May I ask one question?" "Certainly." "What shall I call you?" "What call me ought. Is it not necessary in addressing each and then again. I stepped back in terror and reached out for the old-fashioned bell cord with the heavy tassel at the end that depended from the ceiling and was on the point of grasping and giving it a vigorous pull. "Not so fast, if you please," he said sternly as he stepped forward and gave the knife a rapid swish through the air above my head, causing the cord to fall in a tangle about my hand, cut cleanly, high above my reach. I gazed in dumb stupor at the rope about my hand and raised my eyes to the remnant above. That was motionless. There was not the slightest perceptible vibration, such as would naturally be expected. I turned to look at my guest. He had resumed his seat and had also regained his pleasant expression. But he still held the knife in his hand with his arm extended at rest upon the table which stood upon his right. "Let us have an end to this folly," he said. "Think a moment, and you will see that you are in fault. Your error will rectify easily, and then to business. I will first show you the futility of trying to escape this interview, and then you will proceed to work, for time presses, and there is much to do." Having delivered this remark, he detached a single. Oh, there we go. Yeah. "I will first show you." Having delivered, he detached a single silvery hair from his head, blew it from his fingers, and let it float gently upon the upturned edge of the knife, which was still resting on the table. The hair was divided as readily as been the bell cord. I was transfixed with astonishment, for he had evidently aimed to exhibit the quality of the blade, though he made no allusion to the feat, but smilingly went on with his discourse. "It was just a year ago tonight since we first met. Upon that occasion you made an agreement with me which you are in honor bound to keep, and here he paused as if to note the effect of his words upon me, then added significantly, will keep. I have been at some pains to impress upon your mind the fact that I will be here tonight. You responded that and knew that I was coming, and yet in obedience to a silly whim, deliberately made a meaningless engagement with no other purpose than to violate a solemn obligation. I now insist that you keep your prior engagement with me, but I do not wish that you should be rude to your friend, so you should better write him a polite note excusing yourself and dispatch it at once." I saw that he was right, and that there was no shadow of justification for my conduct, or at least I was subdued by his presence. So I wrote the note without delay. And was casting about for some way to send it when he said, "Fold it, seal it, addressed it. You seem to forget what is proper." I did as he directed mechanically, and without thinking what I was doing, handed it to him. He took it naturally, glanced at the superscription, went to the door which he opened slightly, and handed the billet as if to some messenger who seemed to be waiting outside. Then closed and locked the door. Turning towards me with the apparent object of seeing if I was looking, he deftly drew his knife twice across the front of the doorknob, making a deep cross that deposited the knife in his pocket and resumed his seat. As soon as he was comfortably seated, he again began the conversation. Now that we have settled the preliminaries, I will ask if you remember what I required of you a year ago. I thought that I did. Please repeat it. I wish to make sure you do, then we will start fair. In the first place, you were to present me with a manuscript? Hardly correct, he interrupted. I was to acquaint you with a narrative which is already in manuscript, acquaint you with it, read it to you, and if you prefer not to read it to me. I beg your pardon, I answered. That is correct. You were to read the manuscript to me, and during the reading, I was to interpose such comments, remarks, or obligations or seemed proper to embody as interludes in the manuscripts as my own interpolations, however, and not as part of the original. Very good, he replied. You have the idea exactly. Proceed. I agreed that when the reading had been completed, I would seal the complete manuscript securely, deposit it in some safe place, there to remain for 30 years when it must be published. Just so, he answered. We all understand each other as we should. Before we proceed farther, however, can you think of any point on which you need enlightenment? If so, ask such questions as you choose, and I will answer them. I thought for a moment, but no query occurred to me. After a pause, he said, well, if you think of nothing new, perhaps hereafter questions will occur to you which you can ask. But as it is late and you are tired, we will not commence now. I will see you just 1 week from tonight, and we will begin. From that time on, we will follow the subject as rapidly as you choose, but see to it that you make no engagements that interfere with our work, for I shall be expecting in the future. For I shall be more exacting in the future. Let me be exact. I promised, and he rose to go. A sudden impulse seized me, and I said, may I ask a question? Certainly. What shall I call you? Why call me aught? It is necessary in addressing each other that any name be used. But what are you? I persisted. A pained expression for an instant rested on his face. And he said sadly, pausing between the words, I am the man who did it. Did what? Ask not, the manuscript will tell you. Be content, Linwillen, and remember this, that I am the man. So saying, he bade me good night, opened the door, and disappeared down the broad staircase. 1 week thereafter, he appeared promptly, seated himself, producing a roll of manuscript, handed it to me, saying, I am listening, you may begin to read. On examination, I found each page to be somewhat larger than a sheet of letter paper, with the written matter occupying a much smaller space, so as to leave a wide white border. 100 pages were in the package. The last sentence ending abruptly indicated that my guest did not expect to complete his task in one evening, and I may anticipate by saying that with such successive interview he drew about the same amount of writing from his bosom. Upon attempting to read the manuscript, I at first found myself puzzled by a style of choreography very peculiar and characteristic, but excruciatingly bad. Vainly did I attempt to read it. Even the opening sentence was not deciphered without long inspection and great difficulty. The old man whom I had promised that I would fulfill the task, observing my discomfiture, relieved me of the charge, and without a word of introduction, read fluently as follows. And that ends chapter 3. That is the first 3 chapters of this awesome book. this awesome book known as Etidorhpa, Journeys to the Center of the Earth. It's been just Ty now. Just think about it. Entertainment production. Hey guys, make sure y'all drop a like, subscribe for more, and be sure to check out the previous podcast where I went live and a couple awesome folks. We tied live on our thoughts on these first chapters. So if you want to see what was really in depth, please check it out. It's on the Just Ty Now YouTube channel. So on the Just Ty Now YouTube, just think about it. So when you combine your mind with your heart, connect those two circles, and you let whatever come out, just come on out. We're going to finish. We're going to go through this. I'm going to go through this whole book. This is history. I want this. We'll see. We're going to see, guys, man. But remember, check out all the previous videos as well. Sure to support the channel on Patreon or PayPal or whatever, or share the video, like the video, start the conversation with somebody. Just and any of those guys, just do that, and the channel's gonna continue to grow from here. But I think yeah, guys, check out the Discord link below, and much love, guys, much love. For more, just stay tuned. Just know, guys, we all tie, but do we really tie? Sometimes I don't know, dude. Sometimes I really don't know. Till next time, tie always. Adios. But the weather, the experience of the day, the weird inclement night had all conspired to strain my nerves to the highest point of tensions, and I trembled from head to foot. Noting this, the stranger said pleasantly, "Quiet yourself, my dear sir. You have nothing to fear. Be seated." I obeyed mechanically and regained in a few moments some semblance of composure, took a mental inventory of my visitor. Who is he? What is he? How did he enter without my notice, and why? What is his business? Were all questions that flashed into my mind in quick succession and quickly flashed out unanswered. The stranger sat, eyeing me composively, even pleasantly, as if waiting for me to reach some conclusion regarding himself. At last, I surmised, he is a maniac who has found his way here by methods peculiar to the insane, and my personal safety demands that I use him discreetly. Very good, he remarked, as though reading my thoughts. As well think that as anything else. But why are you here? What is your business? I asked. You have made and lost a wager, he said. You have committed an act of folly in making positive statements regarding a matter about which you know nothing. A very common failing, by the way, on the part of mankind, and concerning which I first to set you straight. The iconical coolness with which he said this provoked me, and I hastily rejoined, "You are impertinent. I must ask you to leave my house at once." "Very well," he answered, "but if you insist upon this, I shall, on behalf of Cicero, claim a stake of your voluntary wager, which means that I must first, by natural though violent means, release your soul from your body." So saying, he arose, drew from an inner pocket a long, keen knife, the blade of which quiveringly glistened as he laid it upon the table. Moving his chair so as if to be within easy reach of the gleaming weapon, he sat down and again regarded me with the same quiet composure as I noted, as and which was fast dispelling my first impression concerning his sanity. I was not prepared for his strange action. In truth, I was not prepared for anything. My mind was confused concerning the whole night's doings, and I was unaware to reason clearly or consecutively, or even to satisfy myself what I did think, if indeed I thought at all. The sensation of fear, however, was fast leaving me. There was something reassuring in my unbidden guest's perfect ease of manner, and the mild, though searching gaze of his eyes, which was wonderful in their expression. I began to observe his personal characteristics, which impressed me favorably and yet were extraordinary. He was nearly 6 feet tall and perfectly straight, well proportioned, with no tendency either to leanness or obesity, but his head was the object for which I could not take my eyes. Such a head surely I had never seen on mortal shoulders. The chin, as seen through his silver beard, was rounded and well developed, the mouth straight with pleasant lines about it, the jaw square and, like the mouth, indicating decision, the eyes deep set and arched with heavy eyebrows, and the whole surmounted by a forehead was vast, so high that it was almost a deformity, and yet it did not impress me unpleasantly. It was the forehead of a scholar, a profound thinker, a deep student. The nose was inclined to aquiline and quite large. The contour and head and face impressed me as indicating a man of learning, one who had given a lifetime of experimental as well as speculative thoughts. His voice was mellow, clear, and distinct, always pleasantly modulated and soft, never loud nor unpleasant in the least degree. One remarkable feature I must not fail to mention: his hair. This, while thin and scant upon the top of his head, was long and reached to his shoulders. His beard was usual length, descending almost to his waist. His hair, eyebrows, and beard were all singular whiteness and purity, almost transparent, a silvery whiteness that seemed an aureole sheen in the glare of the gaslight. What struck me as particularly remarkable was that his skin looked as soft and smooth as that of a child, with his skin looked as soft and smooth as that of a child, there was not a blemish in it. His age was a puzzle none could guess. Stripped of his hair or the color of it changed, he might be 25. Given a few wrinkles, he might be 90. Taken altogether, I had never seen his like, nor anything approaching his like, and for an instant there was a faint suggestion to my mind that he was not of this earth, but belonged to some other planet. Some other planet, guys. I now fancy he must have read my impressions of him as these ideas shaped themselves in my brain, and that he was quietly waiting for me to regain a degree of self-possession that will allow him to disclose the purpose of his visit. He was first to break the silence. I see that you are not disposed to pay your wager any more than I am to collect it, so we will not discuss that. I must admit that my introduction tonight was abrupt, but you cannot deny that you challenged me to appear. I was not clear upon the point and said so. Excuse me. Your memory. Go ahead and watch it. All right, we back. Time for the break. I admit that my introduction tonight was abrupt, but you could not deny that you challenged me to appear. I was not clear upon the point and said so. Your memory is at fault, he continued. If you cannot recall your experiences of the day just past, did you not attempt to interest yourself in modern book lore, to fix your mind and turn upon history, chemistry, botany, poetry, and general literature? In all these failings, did you not deliberately challenge Cicero to a practical demonstration of an old apothegm of his that has survived for centuries, and of your own free will did you not make a wager that as a admirer of Cicero I am free to accept? To all this I could but silently assent. Very good, then. We will not pursue this subject further, as it is not relevant to my purpose, which is to acquaint you with a narrative of unusual interest, upon certain conditions, with which you, if you comply, you will not only serve yourself, but me as well. Tie Now Store, come and explore. 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 Yeah. Come and explore. Tie Store.